Financial markets resume after the Easter break. Nigerian government's 18.1 trillion naira debt exposes banks to high risk, says the International Monetary Fund (IMF). Central Bank of Nigeria debits 10 banks 7.02 trillion naira over CRR violation. Oil rises as Libya outage adds to supply woes. Shanghai prepares to open. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index slips more than 2% as China's tech stocks drop. This is Business Express on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA, and we are reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Leah Kating Baba Tunde. We welcome you back from the Good Friday and Easter holidays. Though some of us in this business never get to share in that holiday, and so we hope you had a very nice one there. We start by informing you that the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, says banks in Nigeria and other emerging markets are exposed to high risk due to rising government debt owed lenders. Governments look to domestic banks for loans to support their budget deficit, and according to the Bretton Woods institution, government debt amounts to a quarter of bank assets in some emerging economies. In Nigeria, the government's debt to banks currently stands at 18.1 trillion naira against the 648.26 billion naira in June 2015. In 2021 alone, a year after the COVID-19 outbreak, the government borrowed 4.34 trillion naira and has borrowed 704 billion naira as of January this year. The IMF, in a statement, said governments across the world have spent aggressively to help households and employers weather the economic impact of the pandemic. The central bank, through the Bankers Committee, is reviewing the level of adoption of the NQR code payment system to make it more acceptable. This was revealed at a recent Bankers Committee meeting. The payment system that was launched last year by the Nigerian Interbank Settlement System is aimed at improving financial inclusion through complementing the payment infrastructure in the country.
You can also make payments from an individual to a business, which we refer to as a P2B model. You do not require huge infrastructure like in other payment platforms. All you need is your mobile phone. Merchants can also get immediate value for the sales that they make on a daily basis, rather than the next day value existing on some other platforms. So the committee decided, after appraising the progress made on the adoption, to increase the level of awareness of this payment platform, considering the huge benefits that it brings to the economy.
The NQR is said to be acceptable in more than 176 countries. The Central Bank of Nigeria again says consumer credit rose 40% year-on-year to 2.1 trillion naira in November last year from 1.5 trillion naira in November 2020, driven by a rise in the tempo of economic activities. The CBN disclosed these in the just released economic report for November 2021, adding that consumer credit accounted for 8.9% of the total credit to the private sector at the end of the month. The report stated consumer credit outstanding increased owing to an increase in the tempo of economic activities. Total consumer credit extended by the other depository corporations grew by 4.3% to 2.1 trillion naira from 2 trillion naira at the end of October. And the Japanese yen hit a 20-year low against the dollar on Tuesday, supported by high U.S. Treasury yields and likely comparatively good U.S. economic data this week. How much is the naira exchanging for the currencies? Let's find out. Nigeria's consumer price index rose to 15.92% in March, as revealed by the National Bureau of Statistics in its latest data release. This new rate is the highest the country has recorded since November 2021, when inflation rate dropped to 15.99%. This rise in inflation rate in the month of March shows that Nigeria is not left out in the global inflation surge currently being witnessed. Now, this is our focus this morning, and I have in the studio Dr. Tochukwu Okafor. He is an economic analyst with Business Media Limited, with a specialization in inflation and the economy. You're welcome, Doctor, to Business Express.
Thank you, Babatunde.
I hope you had a very wonderful holiday.
Yeah, it was a long one. Well, yes.
Oh, fantastic. Now, just last week, we saw a rising CPI. Of course, a lot expected it to rise by the notches we witnessed. Can you give us a breakdown of the factors that are accounting for this increase in the month of March?
Oh, okay. So, actually, inflation between the last 3 years has been evolving, right? It's been evolving based on various factors. We have the monetary factors, the fiscal factors, the domestic and the external factors, those that are beyond our control. So, for the month of, I'm going to backdate a little bit. For the month of February, we saw that it was surge in energy prices and surge in prices of oil and the war in Ukraine that spiked prices. So what we witnessed in March was a pass-through, right? Whatever price increments we witnessed in the fuel products, it has started dovetailing into the prices of food. And yes, core inflation in February was high as 14.01, but this month it dropped to 13.91, and food inflation on the other hand reversed. Right, so in food inflation now is I think 17.20. So the major factor that actually contributed to the rise this month was actually food inflation. Food inflation was more or less the major the major factor that pushed headline inflation this month. And I think another factor that could be accrued to it is the issue of the war in Ukraine and then the wheat prices. I mean, we had issues of cross-elasticity effects. Cross-elasticity is the movement from wheat. People are now going for close substitutes, and as a result of going to close substitutes, scarcity emanates, and then the prices are now increasing. So we noticed that prices of tubers, like in the report, if you see it, it had bread, it had cereal. Then the next we see online is yam, tubers, cassava, and other tubers. So these close substitutes that were supposed to be locally produced cheap substitutes are now increasing in prices. So yes, household food is now increasing, and I think in the next couple of months, if this crisis continues, as long as the war in Ukraine continues, we are most likely going to be seeing continuous increase in inflation, maybe at a tepid pace, but definitely we'll be witnessing increases.
So how is this war impacting food prices? A lot of people are asking this question, and of course you spoke about some of the components that make the CPI being affected by this crisis. Thankfully, the fuel queues have abated. Is it sustainable?
Yes, for the fuel queues, yes, that is sustainable, but the diesel prices are actually affected. So it's a whole component. Let's start with the cross elasticity, for instance. Part of the reason why the transition of food items from Ukraine down here is being a problem is because of, first, their ports have been damaged by the Russian-Ukrainian war. The second one is mining on the Black Sea, and I think the third one is the restrictions put on international merchants to in having what they call the trade relations with Russia. So when you combine all of this, and our major trade partners, which are the US and part of the UK, are actually witnessing high inflation rates. I mean, US bumped from 7.9 to 8.5, and I think UK bumped from 6 to 7. Definitely, we're going to have trickle-down effects when we are importing from them. So, on that note, coming to the wheat aspect, if bread and all the wheat-related confectionaries are already having problems in terms of prices, and people are trying to deviate to other forms of food like the yam I told you, we would continue to witness increases because of scarcity, right? The local substitutes have a limited capacity for what they can carry. Majority were dependent on imports. So if we, on the import side, are now having issues, and then the locally produced ones are now getting scarce, that scarcity is going to, let's just say it the way it is. If I'm a businessman and I'm selling yam and I say that yam is now the next big thing, I am going to actually inflate the prices of my goods. However, even the businessmen have actually been very nice, because if we combine the diesel prices and all the challenges, let's start with diesel prices. People that are having to pay high for diesel prices have not actually transferred it yet to the public. They are still holding their ground. But if the war in Ukraine should enter another 2 months, they have to break, because this thing is going way beyond their budget. But for now, the businesses have not even transferred it. So imagine when the businesses start transferring it minus the food. The food is just one that we are dealing with already. When the businesses start transferring the cost, we are going to see hyperinflation in the medium term.
Wow. Will that be affecting our tax payment system?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the tax system is already fixed, right? And I think that's where the CBN is actually going to, these are one of the major issues they're going to look into in their next meeting, right? It's not already, they've not decided, they've not made a decision on that. And the worst case about this, I also forgot, I need to add this. The IMF this week have already scheduled a meeting for restructuring or downgrading the already forecast they gave. So they are going to downgrade a lot of countries. So whatever comes out of that meeting is dependent on what the MPC is going to decide next month. So right now, nothing is really clear, right? The tax system, everything is dependent on that next meeting. Whatever. So the last meeting, I think 4 out of 10 we are voting for an increase. I think 3 out of the 4 were voting for 25 basic points, and then 1 was voting for 50, and we're already seeing a divide. Should that happen in this other meeting where more take that stance, then that argument of taxes and how they affect inflation will now come into play. But for now, nothing is cast in stone. We're just not sure. We are working with what we had, the dovetail, the offshoot of what came from last year into this year, and then the supply chain, pandemic, war, and now we are dealing with oil prices. I mean, it's just a lot. It's like every day one new thing keeps making the inflation evolve.
Okay, so yeah, basically, you have touched on the spring meetings that are going to kick in proper in a few hours from now. Yeah, and pre that, the briefing by the World Bank puts maintained Nigeria's forecast, right? That was last week. Then you have already pointed out what we were expecting from the IMF, and both parties are already looking at emerging economies like Nigeria restructuring your debts and what have you, to see that we weather the storm with all the issues that are coming. Okay. But then we have this argument that government will need to look into increasing wages to assuage the effects of these high rise in the cost of goods and services.
So that is actually, it's quite risky to say it like that, because if you remember last month, the World Bank released a report saying that Nigeria had bumped from the forecasted 40% poverty rate to 45%. Now that was them being polite. Actually, the actual figures are they're circumnavigating 48 to 50. They didn't just want to put it that way because they don't want to make anything look grim. But the truth about it is the vulnerable non-poor, and when I say the non-poor, those people that are just right there, they're just okay with their wages, right? Yeah. They are already tilting into poverty line, right? So an example is if a family was purchasing 4 slices of bread at 400 back then, and it was sustaining them for 2 days. And now they have a price increment of almost 700 now in some states. At that constant price, at that constant wage, that family has already entered poverty, because the truth is, from that 4 loaves, you are now affording only 2 loaves. And 2 loaves is something that you guys can finish in 2 minutes. So the problem now is we are having a majority of the population dovetailing into the poverty class. So yes, that wage increment is going to be, it's going to be a strategic one, but it's not going to be sustainable, because the truth is, we don't know by how much this increment is going to go to. Because even if you increase the wages already, so for some states, are not even sustainable as we speak. So increasing it might just be putting them just right there in the middle. So if this inflation continues, it will still bump more people over the poverty line. So yes, as much as it's a good strategy, it should be something to just use to, use the word hold body, but it's not sustainable in the long run.
Okay, and then there's the argument that exporting essential goods and commodities might have a positive ripple effect. But here we are in a situation that we are importing basics that we have here, like refined petroleum products, for instance. Mm-hmm. So others say that the issue between Ukraine and Russia, if Nigeria focuses on exporting gas, petroleum products to the Eurozone, we might be having some levity there. So in all these arguments, what do you make of? Where do you stand?
I think it's a classic tale of old habits die hard. You see, the problem now is we've been importing for so long, and these people already have partners that they trade with, right? Coming into the market now, there's really no competition there. You didn't start with me. We already have so take for example 2 other countries we already importing, and then we want to export to a particular country and say that we want to kick out. It's not going to be possible. They know desperate times call for desperate measures. So what they are going to do is they are going to either cash out on us, and when I say cash out, they are going to maximize any opportunity they can use from us, not for our gain, but for their gain. So the truth is, just like the US now, US is running at inflation rates of 8%, 8.5%. And then we are saying we want to start exporting to them. Trust me, whatever they are going to import, or we are going to import from them, they are going to double it for whatever they've collected from us. It's just a smart play. It's just a normal manipulative economics that happens at this kind of time. Everybody is desperate. UK is desperate, US is desperate. The people we are dealing with, these are the giants. Who else are we going to deal with if not the giants? If Russia is out of the picture, you see how grim the picture is. I don't need to paint this further now. You know where I'm going with this.
Okay, yeah, so before I let you go, the central bank has been advancing arguments on why our inflation figures should draw down to single digits, and one of those is the convergence criteria for the ECO, the West African currency that has been coming like forever, if I'll put it that way. Do you see that happening anytime soon?
So again, it still takes me back to where I said inflation has been evolving, and I think the old playbook doesn't come into play anymore, right? Initially, I think last time we saw single digits was January 2016. And we've been battling it from 11, we bumped to 13, 14. I think in 2018, we bumped back to 11. And now we're on 15. Now, the problem is the combination of, now it's evolved from where it was a domestic crisis where we could use the monetary techniques, the traditional monetary techniques, and tackle it. Now, inflation is growing on globalization. It's earmarked on globalization. It's gaining its strength, and the world is a global village. It's almost impossible, and I'll say it again, in the last 3 years, if there's any example we can use, between 2020 till now, the factors that have been driving our inflation are external. It was the COVID-19 crisis first, then it was the, what they call it, supply chain disruption, then this year we now have the war in Ukraine, then there was a time we even had insurgency in the food baskets. That was even, it took a while to handle. Now, the external factors are the major drivers of inflation we're having right now. So until the war in Ukraine settles and these other economies start dampening the inflationary trends, we are going to continue witnessing inflation in double digits, because if the US is still at 8%, and even their policies, they bumped up by 25 basic points, and they are still witnessing from 7.9 to 8.5, how much more us that are importing from them? So we are going to see double digits for a while. Medium term, at least it must touch that decade of 2025. Then if everything starts falling in place, at the end of the day, we will have a cost to start seeing 11%, 10% by 2026, guaranteed.
Okay, I would like to shop there for a while. Thank you, Dr. Tuchikoka,
No problem,
for being on the program
It's
again.
nice
Thank
being
you.
here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so much. And so we move on. The Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDEN, requires an updated legislation to enhance monitoring and evaluation mechanism for impact assessment of its activities. Management of SMEDEN says regulation would make coordination better and improve accessibility. At a meeting with the House of Representatives Committee on Poverty Alleviation, the Director General of the agency, Dikko Umaru Radda, emphasized the need to amend the act establishing SMEDEN. The amendment would facilitate growth and enable more citizens to leverage the economic benefits of MSMEs as additional areas are explored.
Programs like the conditional grant scheme, like the one local government, one product, and the National Business Skills Development Initiative. We all recommend that those projects should be national projects, so that because it has a lot of bearing on reducing the poverty level and creating livelihood for our citizens.
We'll be working together, and the committee will do all the needful to see that we follow the normal procedure until the bill is being passed by the National Assembly, God willing.
The committee was impressed by the level of implementation of capital and zonal interventions projects in 2021, made possible by 100% release of budgeted funds to the agency. Now we move on to Surviving COVID-19 series as put together by Boss the Able.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
My name is Henry Tehembato. I'm a fashion designer. I've been doing it for a while now.
Just like every other person, Henry Tehembato is a fashion designer who had his own fair share of the pandemic that affected his business.
I was actually motivated by passion. I had passion for creativity to make styles. I didn't just see, when I see fabrics, I didn't just see plain clothes, but something that can be more. So that was all I needed to just venture into the job. The coronavirus whole issue came up with plenty restrictions, and due to restrictions of movement and social gathering, it really affected my job, it really affected my business, because people could not go out, they could not celebrate, then there was no need to sew, to make clothes.
To keep his business alive, Henry started thinking out of the box to meet the demands of his clients through the wave of change brought by coronavirus pandemic.
My business was able to survive in that the coronavirus also brought the idea of face masks. So I quickly incorporated that into my business, started making face masks for schools, for churches, for business places that needed it at the time. So I was able to scale through from there. And then still had some persons that were making clothes in preparation to after the coronavirus. So I still had some jobs to do at the time. The coronavirus came in with its good and its bad, like every other thing. Yeah, it had the advantage of making people, it brought job opportunities, sorry to say. It made people see possible ways to do things apart from the norm. As much as it brought the disaster that it came with. But it impacted the business world both positively and negatively.
For Henry, COVID-19 rather expanded his thinking faculty in business as he continues to strive to make ends meet. Boss Day Able, Business Express.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Okay, stocks in Nigeria have resumed this morning, but of course on a very low key. But we'll be bringing you updates later in the day how the market went. But for now, Let's take a trip to the global market.
Investors are watching Ukraine closely after the country's military said on Monday that a long-expected offensive push into the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine has started. European stocks were lower on Tuesday, with investors' attention focused on the latest as the pan-European stock 600 slid. Germany's DAX, UK's FTSE and CAC 40 of France have all opened negative. Shares in Asia were mixed in Tuesday trade as investors watch for market reaction to China's central bank announcing financial support for COVID-hit sectors. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index led losses among the region's major markets as it dropped around 2.2%. Shanghai Composite Index of China dropped 0.05%, while Japan's Nikkei 225 increased 0.69%. U.S. stock futures rose early Tuesday morning as traders navigate one of the busiest weeks of corporate earnings season. In Africa, South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40 is already seen posting 0.69% gain. Namibia's overall index is also advancing at 0.01%, while figures from other markets are yet to come in.
And of course, we end the program here. Don't forget, you can join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. for another edition. Do have a wonderful working week ahead.